It's episode 193 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Visit hankgarner.com and browse through the enormous archives of shows over there. I guarantee there's something for everyone. And when you do visit the site, click over in the right-hand sidebar and subscribe to the show. It helps other people find it. I'd like to thank some sponsors this week, and if you would like to be a sponsor of the show, email me at hankgarner@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Our first sponsor this week is Dominion Rising, 23 all-new science fiction and epic fantasy novels. This is the box set of the year. The collection features nearly 8,000 pages and over 1 million words in total, bringing you sharp, suspenseful, and thought-provoking novels of dark forces and light, of magic and adventure, of enchanted swords and galactic empires. Anchored by New York Times, USA Today, and international best-selling authors, Dominion Rising's authors have also won, among other accolades, the Next Generation Indie Award, the Cygnus Award. It's been shortlisted for the Elgin Award, the J.W. Campbell Award, and named to Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. Between the covers, you'll discover everything from hard science fiction to space opera, epic fantasy to steampunk, dystopias and utopias, populated by aliens, telepaths, starship captains, warriors, vampires, gargoyles, interstellar pirates, mercenaries, badass heroines, lost princesses, robots, androids, and cyber-enhanced humans. Find a link in the show notes. It's available for pre-order for only 99 cents on every major platform. Today's show is also brought to you by LootCrate.com. You can save 10% on any new subscription at trylootcrate.com/Hank and enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for a 10% savings. No matter what you geek out about, Loot Crate has a monthly subscription box for you. Exclusive collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered to your door. Save 10% on any new subscription at trylootcrate.com/Hank. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for a 10% savings. I'd also like to thank Ed Gosney. Visit edgosney.com for his blog, Cool Comics in My Collection. I've recommended Ed's book Transmutations to you before, and I still highly recommend it, but it's on sale now for 99 cents for just a few days. Be sure to pick it up. Visit edgosney.com and check out his blog. Also, Galactic Satori Chronicles by Nick Breaker and Paul Hicks. A thirst for revenge sends one man on a deadly journey through the galaxy in the adrenaline-pumping new novel Galactic Satori Chronicles and its follow-up. Book 1 is Earth, Book 2 is Kron. It's a gripping thrill ride guaranteed to please science fiction fans. Some of the best science fiction out there today. Galactic Satori Chronicles, 2 books out so far. Check for the link in the show notes. And as always, stay tuned after the show for a clip from Richard Gleaves from the Jason Crane series. Thank you for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to bring you an interview with Mark Sullivan. I discovered Mark through his new book, Beneath A Scarlet Sky, and then we'll talk all about that book in just a little bit, but I was immediately hooked when I got into it. Then I started digging, and I recognized Mark's other work, and as happens a lot of times, we know that we know someone, but we don't know that until we know it. So that's kind of funny. But anyway, welcome to the show, Mark.
I'm really happy to be here, Hank.
Mark, I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Must have been about 5 or 6. My mother taught me to read when I was 4. And we didn't have a television, and she would take me to the library all the time to get books, and she used to say that being a writer is a noble thing, and I got interested in it, and then I got in a fight in parochial school in 2nd grade, and my punishment was from Sister Mary Joseph was that I had to, who I was petrified of, that I had to enter the school writing contest, which was K through 8 parochial school, and I was terrified, didn't know what to write about, went home, didn't tell my mother I'd been in a fight, because she was best friends with Sister Mary Joseph.
Of course.
And, yeah, And so the pressure was on. I went upstairs, told my mother I was going to write a story, had no idea what I was going to write about, sweated it for an hour, and then saw a rabbit burning through our backyard with a dog in close pursuit. And I went, okay, I'm writing about that. And I did, and I won.
Oh, wow.
To everybody's surprise except for Sister Mary Joseph.
I love that she doled out punishment at the same time igniting a fire in you that has burned to this day. That's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Do you think she saw something in you, the reason she gave you that particular punishment?
I have to believe it's so. I mean, she was sort of a cryptic person, but yeah, I mean, she must have seen something in me, and she told me to do it, and it worked. And,
I love it.
So, whatever the inspiration,
absolutely,
I'm thankful.
Yeah, as are the rest of us. So, reading through your bio, I'm always fascinated by the journey that people take to get where they are, because with rare exception, and I mean rare exception, out of 200 interviews, 2 or 3. People decided they were going to be novelists, and that's the only thing they ever pursued. Rarely does that happen. Most of the time, we take this circuitous route to get where we are, and I believe that our writing is better for it. Not saying that people that immediately leave college and become novelists don't have something to say. I'm not saying that at all. But there's a certain seasoning that comes with writing when you've been around a little bit and done a few things. What did you decide to do when you left school for your career?
Well, I had decided to be a writer, to be a novelist. I had pretty much figured that out by fifth grade, sixth grade. But, I went to a school that was known for writing, Hamilton College. I did well there in writing. But, when I graduated, I realized what kind of experiences I really had. And I was out for a wild experience. So I applied to become a Navy pilot and did well and was offered a jet pilot's program. And I was offered the Peace Corps. And I went to my father and I asked him, what do you think? Which one should I take? And he looked at me and he said, I think you should take the Peace Corps, which really surprised me. And I went, well, why is that? Because I figured he'd want me to go in the Navy. And he said, you have a severe problem with authority you'll end up in Leavenworth. Which I thought was hilarious, but probably true.
With fighting in the second grade, in parochial school may have included you in there. But, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's really funny, but absolutely true. And so I followed his lead, and I turned down the Navy, and I went and lived in Niger, which was the time the second poorest country on earth. And I lived in a place called Agadez on the ancient caravan route between Tripoli and Timbuktu.
Whoa. So where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Boston, a suburb of Boston. I used to work at Fenway Park when I was a kid and a teenager. So I was a total Boston guy until I went away to college, and then I went to Africa, and then I was just bitten by wanting to see new things and do new things, but I knew I had to figure out a way to pay for it. So I became I read a lot of Paris Review interviews, things like that, and I remember just noting the number of people who had successful writing careers, either as a novelist or a nonfiction writer, and at some point they'd been a journalist, a daily journalist, working for a newspaper. Kurt Vonnegut, was the one that really stuck out for me, and I decided that would be a really good way to be forced to write every day. So I applied to Northwestern and got in, to my surprise, and went.
But before we go that far, Boston to Niger, what was your initial thought when you landed there on the other side of the world and go from Fenway Park working, in the summers to now the ancient caravan routes? Was that culture shock?
Oh, in the extreme, but we were prepared for it. I mean, we landed 4 in the morning. It was 101 with 90% humidity. There were guys with automatic weapons guarding the bottom of the staircase, and it was just discombobulating because we'd been on the road for about 28 hours at the point and I remember getting in a van to go to where we were going to train and looking out the window and seeing women carrying water and pots on their head in the darkness and guys on camels, and I was just like, okay, here we go. I'm living in a National Geographic, episode, and it was that way for the entire 2 years. It was extraordinary.
2 years. What sort of work were you doing there?
I taught English as a second language, and I also worked in the national sports program. I was a coach.
Nice.
Because a lot of the country had 7 tribes, and they were trying to create more of a I am a Nigerian versus a Hausa man or a Zara man or a Tuareg man. I don't think it worked very well. Where I lived is now a very dangerous place.
Oh no.
What do you think that you picked up from that experience that you've taken into your writing?
I have a real appreciation for culture. I have an appreciation for it at all levels, and I don't mean by that ballet or theater as wonderful as they are. It's more of how do people interact and how do they survive and deal with life on a daily basis. And seeing that in Africa carried over to my journalism and then certainly to my work as a novelist. One of the things I do is I write with James Patterson, and I'll get sent to a city like Berlin or Paris or Rio de Janeiro, and I'll have to kind of parachute in for 3 weeks, and I've done enough research and hired guides to come out of there with a really good story for the two of us.
Wow. When you left Niger, and I'm assuming you came back to the States, is
Yes,
that
sir.
when you went to journalism school?
Yes, I went in the fall of 1982.
Okay. And when you I can only imagine after spending 2 years abroad like that, coming back and sitting in a classroom with other, fresh-faced journalism students. I think I would kind of have a bit of an air of superiority, looking at them, thinking, "Oh, what have you guys done, with your life so far?"
Sure. Well, I can't say that I felt that, but I felt like I had, a more adventurous spirit than I was willing to, ask anybody anything. I didn't care. And, that was the nice thing about Medill, is that we only spent, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks in a classroom, and then it was out. We were out in the streets reporting and working in real scenarios that I would go on to see in newsrooms. It was exactly like that. And it was a great training experience.
Yeah. So where did you go to work after that?
My very first job was at Reuters, the British wire service. And I worked in the Loop in Chicago covering the commodities exchanges. And I did that for 9 months. And I also worked at night at United Press International as a sports reporter. And then I got a job working for a place that's now defunct called States News Service in Washington, D.C. We used to call it the boat people of American journalism. But it allowed us to write for some excellent papers. I wrote for the New York Daily News, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, Washington Post, a whole bunch of them. And I was a backup writer, but it was invaluable, and I ended up getting an offer to join an investigative team in San Diego at the San Diego Tribune. So I went there and spent 6 years as an investigative reporter, and loved it, but figured out that it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And it was enough. I'd been in journalism almost a decade at that point, and I decided that I wanted to be a novelist more than anything else. So I quit my job, and we moved to Vermont. My wife had a job offer in Vermont. She at the time ran rehab clinics. She's a speech language pathologist, and she was able to support us through that first year and a half, 2 years, until I sold my first one. And yeah, we lived in a converted barn in Vermont, and I wrote first two, and I finished the first one. I'd already been working on the first one while I was reporting, and then wrote the second one, and then the third one, and then we wrote one more in Vermont before we moved out to Montana, which is where we live now.
Nice. I think a lot of people look at investigative journalism very romantically, because we see movies that are very exciting, and we see journalists that crack open conspiracies and things like that, and it looks very exciting. And the guys sitting at at computers and changing the world by bringing things to light. I can imagine that it's probably not that romantic day to day. I would imagine there are some big breakthroughs you get to make. But what's the day to day life of an investigative journalist like?
It's a grinding experience. You dig and you dig and you dig, because if you're put on an investigative story, you're going outside the norm. You're not reacting. You're moving with intention, because you believe there's certain things that are happening, and you're out to prove it. Some of that proving is just dull. I was part of a team that worked on a series of stories about the California funeral industry, and we spent like weeks, there were three of us, going through death certificates and disposition certificates, which are, one is you die and what happened to the body. Was it disposed of at sea? Was it disposed of, however? And, through a long period of trial and error and being able to match these things up, we were able to prove that a crematorium was burning multiple bodies at the same time, which is completely illegal, and got them put out of business.
Wow.
It took, a long time. The whole project took 7 months, I think, before we could start publishing. And you just go in, you go every day until you feel, and the people you're working with, that everybody feels like we've got the story that we want to tell, and here we go.
Right. According to your bio, at some point during there, and like you said a minute ago, you decided that you really wanted to be a novelist. And you said on your website that around the time you turned 30, you were kind of scared that you weren't going to hold up that promise to yourself. What was that? What was that kind of decision process for you like when you and your wife decided, okay, I'm going to do this, and we're going to move across the country? And I guess you did. First off, did you have an idea for a specific book at that time? And
I was working on a novel at that time. I mean, not when I was 30. When I cracked my eyes at 30 is when I started writing the novel, because I realized that I wasn't on the path that I always thought I'd be. I mean, I really liked being an investigative reporter. It was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I don't regret a moment of it. But there was something that was missing, and I was working on a novel probably from the time I was 30 to 33, which became The Fall Line, which was my first book. And I took 6 months leave of absence and went and lived with extreme skiers, and they formed the basis of the book. But I came back, and I remember the two papers, the San Diego Tribune and the San Diego Union, were going to merge, and 175 journalists were going to lose their job. And I had a little baby, and it became a really toxic place to work. And then late one night, so I was always looking for a story, because I just said, if I just focus on doing my job, I'll be fine. And late one night, I was up with my son, Connor, and bouncing on my knee because he couldn't sleep. And I'm watching television, and on comes this infomercial with this guy cruising around in a helicopter, and he lands in front of this castle in Del Mar, California, San Diego County, and says, "I can change your life." And I go, who is this guy? He's got to be a ripoff artist, right? And he's going on, and now I'm sure he's a ripoff artist. And I said, I'm going to investigate this guy, Tony Robbins. And I was always fair, so I made the newspaper buy me his 30 Days to Personal Power program. And I figured I'd listen to one or two tapes, toss it away, and be on my way to proving he was a ripoff artist. Instead, I listened to 30 days, and on the 31st, I quit my job.
Oh, man. I know a lot of people have that desire and that dream. What was it for you that just kind of, what was the defining moment for you?
You mean in quitting?
Yeah, and when.
Well, it was something that Robbins said, and it was, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was like, you can take the safe way in life and you can fail, just as easily as you can take the dream way of life and fail. So you might as well try the dream. And once I grasped that, I went, you know what, he's right, and that's what I'm going to do, and I did, and it worked.
That's awesome. So what was that first book that you wrote?
I wrote The Fall Line. It's about extremes. It was a New York Times notable book of the year right away.
Yeah. Did it find a publisher pretty quickly?
Got rejected by 17 publishers, got the 18th, and then went on to be a New York Times notable book of the year, which proves once again that no one in any creative field knows anything.
That's right. Oh man. So you're living in Vermont, and you've got this book that was successful after taking this giant leap of faith. That had to be a huge boost for your writing career, as far as your wanting to continue and knowing that, okay, I did make the right decision.
Yeah, I got it published, and that's just huge in and of itself. To actually get a hardcover book published was amazing and incredibly gratifying. And then I got the critical acclaim, and that sort of set me up. The second book did okay, and then I wrote the third book, The Purification Ceremony, and that one went on to get an Edgar nomination for Best Mystery of the Year. Didn't win, but that also helped me, and was off and going.
After the first book, which was about extreme skiers, what got you into the kind of mystery thriller genre? Well,
The Fall Line was a thriller, but a psychological one about why these people do this stuff, and I relied on my reporting skills and my investigative reporting skills and my storytelling ability, and it just. I wrote what came out, and people told me they were thrillers and mysteries. And you never know what you're writing when you're writing it. I don't think. That's up to people who are far smarter than me in the marketing department to tell me what I've done.
Right. Do you? First, where do I hate the cliche question, where do ideas come from, because ideas are all around us, but I do kind of agree with what you're saying, that sometimes you don't know what the book is until you start writing it, and it sort of sets itself up. Do you begin with a character? Do you begin with a scenario? Kind of, how do these things start unfolding for you?
A lot of them start for me like they start for Stephen King, with a premise. Or a question, what if? And, I'll start playing with that. And from there, the characters start to suggest themselves. And I spend a lot of time with the characters, because really who they are and how they respond is what drives the story. So what I try to do is, in the first 8 or 9 novels I wrote, that's exactly the way I wrote them. And, the benefit is that you get an organic product, but it may take like 2.5 years, 3 years to write it, because you don't really know where you're going with it when you start. And I don't know, about book 9 or 10, I started really not only working on the characters, but then working on the suggestion of a plot, so that I had a roadmap. And from there, it evolved again when I started working for Patterson, who absolutely insists on outline. And I balked at first, but I really came to understand the benefits of it.
How did that relationship with Patterson come about?
So at one time we shared the same foreign agent, and she and I had parted on really good terms when I went to another agency that was full service, and we'd always got along. She liked the way I write, and he was looking for someone to work on a book based in Berlin, and some of my books had done very, very well in Germany, and he called me up and we talked, and then I was going to New York by coincidence 2 days later, and went up and spent a day with him, and we hit it off even more, and he offered me the job, and I've written 5 with him now.
You said that he insists on working from an outline, and you initially balked at that. What is it when you're writing a story with 2 very high level writers like that? What is that relationship like? Do you guys plan together, and then kind of how does that functionally work?
At times he hands me, a really detailed outline to begin with, and I start playing with that. At times he'll suggest a premise, and we'll both think it's working, and then I'll start doing research and funneling other suggestions in the outline to him. And usually for outlining, I'm giving him stuff once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, until we've got the outline where we think it's solid, and then I go there, right? So we work on the outline before I go, so that when I land, it's like, I want to see this, and this, and I want to talk to someone about how this would work, and it's all designed to give me the flesh to go on the bones, because we've done the work to understand that, if I'm going to Berlin, I know where I want to go. And so I have guides waiting for me, and they're stacked up, and we just go all day long. And I'm gathering everything from scenes to dialogue to, I make room for serendipity. So if something just happens and barges its way into the book, by all means, if it makes it better, we do it. And we're not 1,000% wed to the outline as it exists when I'm going to one of these places. And, free to evolve as long as it makes it better.
Sure. I love the idea of going in person to go kind of soak in the place. And, I've heard some people say, we live in an era now with Google Maps and Google Earth and all of that sort of things. You can zoom in and you can pick out little details that you could drop in that you'd never have been able to before. But that's absolutely no substitution for immersing yourself there with the people. When you're doing on-site research, what sorts of things are you looking for that brings the story alive to the reader without just inundating them with little details that that just kind of oversaturate and don't bring the story alive?
Yeah, I'm looking for, as I said, like an example, I'm looking for scenes where certain things, that dramatic events are going to take place. And I'll give you an example. So in Private Berlin, there's I gotta remember what his rank was. He's a commissar, and he's a homicide inspector with the Berlin police. And it turns out that his father was a member of the East German police, like the secret police. And there's a series of killings start happening in Berlin, and he's estranged from his father. His father takes a walk every day, and in the outline it was like he intercepts his father where he walks. I didn't know where we were going, and so I took a bicycle tour of the Berlin Wall, and we rode into this place called Treptower Park. And Treptower Park was built by the Russians after the end of the war as their war memorial. And you ride up to it, and there's these huge Russian flags that are made out of red granite from Hitler's chancellery, and they're big statues. And then you get up onto this first part of the monument where these soldiers are kneeling in grief, and they're life size, and you walk between them, and there are 7 sarcophaguses planted below you. I mean, it drops away steeply. It's very dramatic, and below you there are these huge sarcophaguses, and I think there are about 80,000 people buried there. Russians who died in the Battle of Berlin. And out at the other end, there's this huge statue of, the great Russian soldier crushing the swastika beneath his feet while carrying a German child. And around it, there's this bridle path. And I went, oh my God, he walks right here every night. This is his world, right? This is the communist world right here. This is the triumph of it. And the story radically changed at that point, and it started to resonate in ways that it hadn't been before. So that's what I'm looking for, that kind of stuff.
Your newest book, Beneath A Scarlet Sky, I said at the beginning of the show that I picked this book up a little while ago, and it is absolutely fascinating. And I was hooked by like the second or third page, and I think I reached out to you shortly after that. So Amazon has this new thing, Amazon Charts, that I discovered a few weeks ago, and I've been kind of looking at it every day or so since then. And Beneath the Scarlet Sky has been on the most bought and most read chart, and that's a cool thing that Amazon's doing. I guess they're monitoring Kindle page reads. So not only can you see who's buying what book, but who's actually reading those books. And Beneath the Scarlet Sky has been like in the 3 or 4 on both of those charts, solid for a couple of weeks now. Tell me where the idea for this book came from.
So the idea came to me, well, it was delivered to me on the worst day of my life. My younger brother and best friend had drunk himself to death. This was in February of 2006.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
So Matt had died, and he was very close. I was very close to him, and he died. And then I wrote a book that tanked in the States, and we were on the verge of personal bankruptcy. And driving to a Costco on a snowy Montana highway, I realized I was worth more dead than alive. And I thought driving into a bridge abutment was a really good idea. Thankfully, images of my wife and son stopped me, but I pulled into that Costco parking lot as rattled as I've ever been. And I put my head on the steering wheel, and I begged God and the universe for a story with meaning and purpose. And no kidding, I go home, I'm in no mood to do anything, and my wife forces me to go to a dinner party by myself because we had to cancel 3 times on these people. And I go to this dinner party. I know the host, but I don't know the other people. And one of these guys during dinner starts telling me the snippets of this incredible story about a 17-year-old boy in World War II Italy. And I was blown away by the story, and I didn't believe it, though. I mean, I was really skeptical. And then it turned out that the Nazi occupation of Italy and the Catholic underground that formed to save Italy's Jews had never been written about it to a deep extent. And then I learned that Pino Lella, the boy, was alive. So I took some of the last of our dwindling funds, and I told my wife I was going to go to Italy to chase a 60-year-old war story. And to my wife's great credit, she didn't flinch. She said, well, of course you are. And
oh, man.
Over I went, and the first time I went, I spent 3 weeks with Pino. He was 79, and I listened to him dig up a story he had buried 6 decades before. Just an incredible story of struggle, triumph, and tragedy that reduced us both to laughter and tears again and again. It was an extraordinary experience for me as a person, because listening to Pino, my own problems soon paled, and his insight into life's heartbreak gave me new perspective on life. And I left Italy 3 weeks later a changed person, and I vowed to tell Pino Lella's story to as many people as I could. I just didn't think it was going to take me 11 years. I didn't.
I'm sitting here literally with goosebumps. That's the best story I've heard all day. There is something, and I don't like to get all woo-woo or whatever, but sometimes stories seem to come from somewhere else. Like And there's just no way to explain it other than this is bigger and better than me. And I just happen to be in the right place at the right time and get to be the guy that records the story. So what was it about this story that took you 11 years to tell?
Well, at first I wanted to, I was originally setting out to write it as a pure nonfiction book. And one of the things that hampered me was that at the beginning, Pino, when you read the book, he goes through some just brutal situations because it's the war. And, I came to believe and totally believe that he suffered from PTSD for years afterwards, and from a head injury that he had when a bomb went off when he was guarding a train station later in it. But most people, you find out, they block something in PTSD. So, for example, I heard just this morning about these Cambodian women who were living outside of Long Beach, and they were all of a certain age, and they almost all had terrible eyesight. And it turned out there was nothing wrong with their eyes, but they had seen the killing fields in Cambodia, and they never wanted to use their eyes again. It's a true story. And so you never know what people are going to do and bury him. Pino buried the names of the two people who caused him the most pain, one of which was Anna, the maid of Dolly, the general's mistress, and the other one was the general. He came up with Anna's name relatively fast as I pressed him, probably 3 days into the process. He wasn't happy talking about her ever at all. And the general he said, I always referred to him as Mon Generale. He was the most powerful, second most powerful general in Italy. He answered to Albert Speer and Adolf Hitler. People called him Kaufmann or Hauptmann. And so I spent 2.5 years trying to find a general named Kaufmann or Hauptmann. And I didn't find him. And what I figured out was Pino had become a driver for the a general on the German High Command. I don't think I've said that yet. And so this general, I spent all this time looking for Kaufmann and Hauptmann and wasn't finding him. And I had people who were the heads of the organization Todt in Italy, and I knew who they were. And I was almost positive that the general was a guy named Layers, but I wasn't positive. So I needed to nail it. So I went to the Nazi War Archives in Berlin after about 3 years of working with archivists and stuff. And I worked in Germany with a kid who was a Fulbright scholar at Heidelberg University. And we found in Friedrichsburg, where the few documents that remain about General Layers are deposited, we started finding these documents with Layers' name above the word Hauptmann, and we couldn't figure it out because at first Hauptmann means it's a military designation of captain, but it also means boss, and that's when Nips figured out that what was going on was that Pino had been hearing people calling Layers boss, and so I said, well, what's Kaufmann? And he said it's a homonym. And I went, what? And he said, yeah, it's not Kaufmann, it's Kopfmann, which means headman or boss. And then shortly thereafter, everything clicked, and we got a picture of Layers to him, and he identified it. And then I was, largely off and running. But I spent another trip in Italy, another trip in Germany, another trip in Great Britain, so I could understand the bombing campaign that hit Milan in the last 2 years of the war. But there were still gaps in it, and I finally decided that I was never going to be able to, because of the Nazi burning of documents at the end of the war, and too many people had died. I remember I got to the story 60 years after the fact. And so I decided at a point about 3 years ago that I would write it as a novel. And because I found out that Schindler's List was written as a novel, which I didn't know. I thought it was a pure nonfiction, but it's not. It's a novel. So I set out to write the book, and it took me about 2 years, 18 months, while working on other projects. And when we were getting ready to go out with it, I said I an editor who was as passionate about the story as I was, and a publisher who could put the book in as many hands as possible. And I got it, with Amazon. They've done an amazing job.
Cool.
How cool.
So while you were working on this book, you were working on other writing projects all along? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Do you ever have trouble juggling those two things? This thing that's burning in the back of your mind, this passion project, with other things where you have deadlines and things like that. Do you ever have trouble weighing the two of those things out?
Yeah, slightly, but I've been at this a long time now. I've been writing for, full time for probably close to 35 years. And, you learn how to juggle as a newspaper reporter, and juggling as a novelist. At first, I would not do that kind of stuff when I was a young novelist, but I read this great book by Sidney Lumet, the film director, about his film career, and he said, as a creative person, there's 3 reasons to do things. One is that you have to, it's your passion project, and the other one is you want to work with the people who are involved, and the third is you're doing a project to make money to fund the other 2. And once I got my head wrapped around that, I was like, he's right, and you should just, this is your life. You got to juggle, you got to make time for the passion project, and you still got to make a living, and you still want to do interesting projects that people approach you with. And so that's how I've lived my life, for at least the last 6 or 7 years. And it works. I'm sometimes writing 3 books at once, and it surprises me that I can keep track with it. But I have little things that I use. They're secret weapons to keep me on board of what's going on. It works.
Absolutely. Mark, it has been a great joy to talk to you. Beneath a Scarlet Sky is the new book. I cannot recommend it enough. I want everyone to go out and grab a copy of it. The story will haunt you, and it has done that to me. Mark, it's been so much fun to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find you to get plugged in with your work?
There's MarkSullivanBooks.com. And then on Facebook, it's Mark Sullivan BKS, or Mark Sullivan Author. I'm sorry. Mark Sullivan BKS is my Twitter handle.
Great. Thank you. We're going to send everyone to see you and pick up a copy of Beneath a Scarlet Sky. Thanks so much for taking time to come on the show.
Appreciate it, Hank.
Stay tuned now for a clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes. There's a link to the entire series in the show notes. As always, tune in every Tuesday and Friday for new episodes of the Author Stories podcast. Find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. Now on to our clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes.
How do we know when we are watched? Do the eyes of a predator reflect moonlight, focusing it on our skin? Do we feel 2 little spots of white on our neck and bristle with fear? I knew I was watched, and I could feel its quality. A man's gaze, like yearning eyes in a smoky tavern. I felt drawn to it. I skirted the pond, and beneath a vine-choked bower, I found the horseman's severed head. The braid at the back had snagged on some twig, turning the dead eyes upward. A dragonfly rode his cheek. It fled as I reached for him. I took hold of his braid, like the vine of a pumpkin, and drew him from the water. We sat together on a mossy log, he and I. Oh, I felt such joy to look upon his face again. I wiped the mud from his lips and nostrils, preparing him to be buried. The Domine could not watch the graveyard always, I decided. I would wait for night to fall, steal a shovel, and do the work myself. A trio of colonial soldiers were raising a redoubt nearby. Thomas the gravedigger brought them his own long-handled shovels. He stood and watched the soldiers work with professional interest, as dirt was his trade. Autumn leaves snagged in his hair, but he was too busy tale-telling to notice. The morning's dark business had quite bewitched his imagination. But the big one was a Hessian. One of them horsemen, head lopped off by a cannonball. He'll be a-haunting this place now, he will. With a hip-hip and a clippity-clop. I'll be seeing headless spooks in my burying ground. Just you wait. And if he can't find his own head, he'll be wanting one of ours. Lord love us." He shivered, hands in pockets. The soldiers laughed at him, but the boy was serious. Our legend had begun to spin itself already, from the lips of our tow-headed gravedigger. Fact and fiction going their separate ways, severed, as they often are. I listened with fascination. I had always loved a ghost story, and I'd never witnessed the birth of one before. Ghost stories are a form of history. If we say, 3 men died building that church and they forever haunt it, we keep those souls alive in death. Ghost stories are the past bleeding into the present, demanding acknowledgement of those unseen presences all around us, in our street names and genealogies and on our crumbling headstones. The tragedy of Old Willow, the fall of the horseman, the fate of you or I. These tales are forgotten by academic historians, who chronicle only great men. But our small lives are remembered, so long as our ghost stories are told. That is why we must tell them and retell them, and keep them kindled in the hearts of our children.